Hi, my name's Abdullah Saeed. I'm a writer and producer and the creator of the new Hulu comedy series Deli Boys. And you're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing.
Yeah. My name is Abhay, and I share conversations with talented and interesting individuals linked to the global Indian and South Asian community. It's informal and informative, adding insights to our evolving cultural expressions, where each person can proudly say, "Trust me, I know what I'm doing." Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. It's maybe been about 5 minutes of us talking, even, since starting this already, but I feel like I have found some sort of kindred spirit here who I can relate to. And I'm really, really just thrilled to be joined by Abdullah Saeed. Abdullah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Brother, thank you so much for having me on. And yeah, you have an incredibly gentle vibe. I can't imagine anyone comes on your show and doesn't feel this connection.
That's good. I mean, I wish my kids, shared in that sentiment all the time. But as is always, to each their own. I've been learning a lot more about you, and there are just so many angles to your expressions, your music, your comedy, your acting, your advocacy. And of course, you happen to have created a hit show on Hulu in Deli Boys. Of course, your LinkedIn profile says that you're an underachiever and you're proud of it.
So it still says that.
I
think
right.
I must have put that on not that long ago, but I haven't touched the rest of the LinkedIn profile in many years. I feel fortunate because I was not good at the conventional job getting mechanism. You know what I mean? So I poured a lot of time into making resumes, into making that LinkedIn page. And that is, of course, a Bart Simpson quote.
I love it. Yeah. I mean, first off, any way to tether in and tentacle the Simpsons into just about every aspect of life is important.
Yeah.
And yet, for the most part, with all of these, sort of things that are going on in the, let's call it the Abdullah-verse, all of that is not quite on the periphery, sounding like a whole lot of underachieving. I mean, is there something that you feel like, hey, these are just this is just who I am. I'm putting it out there. And if someone likes to call it over or underachieving, so be it.
Yeah, I think there's a couple. Great question, by the way. No one else has asked me this, and this is definitely the kind of thing I feel like that gets to the heart of who I am. In that, conventionally speaking, I'm a stoner. I'm a musician. I'm a lot of things that I think by conventional understanding would be kind of a scofflaw or a scrub or something like that, right? But of course, all I'm really doing is expressing myself in the only way I know how to do it. And, I think that I've always wanted the world to see me as, as a serious person, for lack of a better word, right? And it's a kind of thing that I've struggled against a little bit because just my affectation, my vibe, my sense of humor, I laugh like an insane person, very easily. I've always had this feeling of being a bit of a Bart Simpson, sort of being underestimated in some ways, right? But I also love to own that. I love punks and scofflaws and outlaws, right? And that's really who I speak to, whether it's in cannabis world or it's brown kids who just didn't fit in, right? That's really who I'm here for. I want to be their avatar because I do think that people like that have a different take on how we got to live our lives. And I think that now more than ever, we need a different take, right? So yeah, I also, there's another side to it that's more personal. I am told that I generate a lot of stuff, whether it's music or writing or anything else, but it's a fraction of what's going on in my head or the ideas that I have in my stack. I look at myself as a person who does not spend enough time writing, and I kind of beat myself up about it. And I love to write, which is, I'm told, kind of unique among screenwriters. My favorite thing is to sit right here at this desk I'm talking to you at and write, get stoned and write. It's my greatest joy. I love the writer's room. I love being on set. I love every aspect of doing this show. But to me, sitting here and writing is the best. And, like there's so many things, like my stack is so high. I have to do rewrites, on my own stuff. And this is all self-started stuff, right? Like I have that delusion of a screenwriter where you start writing something, you pour hundreds of hours into it, assuming that people are going to want to read it or perhaps produce it, right? And it takes that kind of delusion. But yeah, the reason I see myself as an underachiever is that I have a lot of unfinished stuff sitting on my pile.
That's always the dilemma, right? That like, there's the stuff that's out there, there's the stuff that's piled up on your desk, and then there's even the more volumes that are just sitting in your head, and you can't even like process it. And yet, being the kind of voice of the scofflaw, being the sort of stoner guy who's writing. I mean, to a degree, to even get that expression out there takes some courage and some vulnerability and the ability to just say, hey, here's who I am, and here, take it or leave it. And with that courage or vulnerability, did you find particularly that you had to harness or even practice some of that when it came to getting Deli Boys out there? And I mean, even in just like the soup to nuts process, but furthermore, just being able now that people are experiencing it, was there an element of courage and vulnerability that you found, hey, this is a part of my practice of courage and vulnerability?
Absolutely, man. Again, another great question, my dude. But yeah, so, I started out as a journalist, right? Telling other people's stories. But then when I started writing Weediquette, my long running column at Vice, that was much more personal. It was like personal stories from my life. And they were true. Every story was true, right? And it involved cannabis in some way, involved my family and my friends. And, I got this very positive response. But then, of course, I also got some judgment, right? I got some judgment from brown people who don't understand that cannabis is our heritage and that our aversion to it is a post-colonial mindset, right? Really, when I learned to take the mask off in a way, it was a couple of different things coming together, right? And actually, Jesse Bradford, who's a great actor and a friend of mine, the first guy I lived with when I came to LA, I remember distinctly him describing that, when you're performing, when you're acting, you're taking layers off as opposed to putting layers on. You know what I mean? Like you're showing parts of yourself that the world doesn't see normally. And for me, really, stand-up was a big entry into that. So the way I started doing stand-up was, I did a storytelling show. I'm the type of person who, if I'm 40% sure that I can do something, I will tell you 100%, yes, I can do it, right? So somebody, asked me if I wanted to do a storytelling show, my friend Lindsay Ames. And, I performed and, Eric Andre and DJ Doug Pound, who's his, longtime editor, were both performers on there. They both said I was funny. And Eric Andre was like, do you do stand-up? And I was like, no, I've never done it. This is the first time I've done it. And he was like, you should give it a try. And I took this as a real glowing endorsement that I should start doing stand-up, right? And so I started to do it. And, of course, the stories you're telling in stand-up are fictionalized to a degree, but I think the best stand-up is partially embellished and also rooted in something true and real, right? Yeah. So I was telling stories about, being like a Muslim in an Uber with a guy who's, more Muslim than I am. And so he wants to have a Muslim off, right? He wants to have like a contest with me or whatever. Things like that really get to the heart of, my identity. And I felt like I was showing parts of myself and you're getting an immediate response, right? Yeah. So like, that taught me to not only accept when people didn't have a positive reaction to what I was saying, right? But also that when they did, to like, to feel the joy of that you're putting yourself out there, right? It's really hard to be vulnerable as a man, right? Especially a man, straight man who was raised on 90s media, didn't have, that much guiding force in terms of how to be a man in the world, right? And so, doing this stuff, it was difficult. And ever since I came to LA, like 8 years ago, I came knowing that I have things that I need to work on and unpack, like from my past, like traumas, things like that. And doing therapy, getting on antidepressants, I feel like are one side of it. And the other side was learning to, find myself, the real self, like I always say that, the jokes are the most important thing to me. They are, right? But it is also like, it's true that it's the heart of the characters to me that is, that's the life of the show in a lot of ways, right? I think the jokes are a technical aspect of it in some ways that I really enjoy. But, I've had to sort of figure myself out. Another way was, I was doing auditions, right? I think a lot of multi-hyphenates, when they get representation, they start getting auditions, but you never really know what you're doing, right? Like, it's a specific art to audition, separate from acting even in some ways, right? And my wife is a very experienced auditioner and actor and has been, a working actor for many, many years. And I would look at these auditions and be like, I don't know what the hell this is. And she clarified it for me. She was like, first of all, you're getting better auditions than most people do because of the shows you've just been on and all that. So don't look that in the mouth, right? And that's how I learned to appreciate the struggle and the grind of an actor. Like, they are out here, and they put themselves out there, man. They really like put their heart on a platter, and they deal with so much rejection and judgment and stuff. I really gained a lot of empathy for actors just through my wife. And then also approaching those specific auditions in that way. Now, I am not a very good actor. I didn't get a lot of traction, I don't know if I ever got a call back, maybe once. I think I got a call back on What We Do in the Shadows, and it was like the greatest moment of my life, right? But and then didn't get the job. But like, I really did learn to read the script from the perspective of an actor. Actors understand my pages better than I do sometimes. They find things in the characters that bring them to light. So it really was sort of looking at that. And then, of course, all of that came together to help me be a better pitcher. You know what I mean? So it's like, getting in the room, telling them your perspective. And also, my fellow EPs, Jenny, especially on Deli Boys, encouraged me to be myself. You know what I mean? And to let that out. Now, for so much of my life, right? We were talking about my LinkedIn page earlier. For so much of my life, I was trying to hide who I really was behind those credentials because I thought that was the only way to get a job and earn a living, right? And it took me a while to realize that it's about being myself. It took graduating into like a terrible economy and being kind of an underachieving student, not getting many job prospects, not getting opportunities to earn in a, quote unquote conventional way. And so finding random freelance writing jobs, playing music, DJing, doing all that stuff. I was sort of cast into that world without an understanding that there's any way to make a living off it. I have, a Desi family. No one was ever like, entertainment's a really viable path to earn a living.
Yeah, that's the first thing that comes to mind, right? But I think, what you're talking about a lot here is that being yourself, being authentic, at least sort of like getting that courage and feeling vulnerable and putting yourself out there, that does drive a lot of empathy. That does actually relate to people. That does cultivate trust. And it's almost like that story you're telling of like, who can out-Muslim the other? There's just such an absurdity to that, right? And we all find comfort and normalcy and sometimes, some real kind of, nurturing from the absurd. And that actually makes us it helps us to, sort of actually be courageous, be vulnerable. And those kind of maybe unexpected juxtapositions that are out there, right? Crime and bloodshed with comedy, halal and haram, the stories in Philly, but the filming's in Chicago. Your father-in-law created this, comedy based in a Nazi prison. Yeah. So those kind of thematic contrasts, are those particularly things that sort of tickle you or you crave in a way to push the kind of boundaries on things and even to a degree motivate that big giant, stack of stuff that's sitting on your desk or in your head?
Absolutely, man. And, it's juxtaposition, I think, is at the heart of comedy. It's at the heart of immigrant storytelling in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
So, my whole life I've been balancing those two sides, right? And really, I think it's like, those dichotomies emerge, right, to confirm that you're doing a good job, that you're doing the right thing, right? The world will deliver them to you. You just have to recognize when that diversity in thought or concept is going to serve you, right? Which I think is very often, I think diversity in thought and concept is actually like at the heart of being a good human in a lot of ways, right? And, I look at my father-in-law, my mentor, Al Ruddy, and, like he was with Deli Boys every step of the way. Like even when, his eyes were deteriorating and he couldn't read, he would have his assistant print like giant font, script pages. He watched the pilot, he saw Allie's rushes and, he was so supportive of it. And I thought it was incredible that this very prestigious filmmaker had such a close relationship with me, like a punk Muslim kid, right? And Al,
That's
never
the juxtaposition, right?
Yeah. I mean, and never crossed his mind once. I mean, this 94-year-old white Jewish man, right? He just loved me and I loved him. And it was this beautiful relationship, right? And, the fact that he started his career in entertainment by making jokes within the most, dire and tragic circumstance that we know of, right? I just thought that was so incredible. And that was really up my alley. Like, look, I do jokes in my stand-up that are a little clubby, if you will. They're like a little edgy or uncomfortable because there's certain settings in which that really works, right? And so I'll make jokes about Muslims that people are like, should I be laughing at this or whatever? But I'm like, well, I get to make those jokes, right? Because like I've had the lived experience of being this person and I'm inviting people to laugh at it with me, right? And I think a lot of that also goes into, I think a lot of that went into Deli Boys as well, right? Like I've been a drug advocate my whole life. I believe that the lines that we draw between food, drugs, and medicine are completely arbitrary. And the fact that we, end people's lives effectively by throwing them in jail over these delineations is like absolutely ridiculous, right? And so you would say that a person like me would never make a show that trivializes a dangerous, quote unquote, dangerous drug like cocaine, right? And yet in this show, there is no apology. We don't talk about the other side of it. We don't talk about the human cost of this thing because that's not our lot. We are not the place. You should not be coming to this show for morality, right? And yet my background is in journalism, which you would hope at its best is centered on morality in some ways, right? Or at least, right? Or at least showing you the facts and evoking some sort of ethical response from you, right? And so it's a wild swing from one thing to the other, but really I'm just following the path that was laid in front of me, my man. Like it was truly like because I was doing documentary and I felt called to do documentary about drugs and to do drugs on camera and to do all that stuff and to shed light on all these stories, right? But then I just lost the opportunity to do it. People weren't buying my documentaries, but somebody bought, a script for myself and my friend Ben and, or a concept. Then we started writing this script and I was just following that path. So really, in a lot of ways, I look back and see these patterns because the human mind is trained to see those patterns, right? But really, I'm just walking this kind of predetermined path in some ways, right? I'm surfing the collapse of various media platforms, right? And just trying to keep my head above water. And really, to me, that is the thrust of my personal story. The things I make, the music, the art, the writing, all that stuff is kind of just incidental. That's me expressing myself as I go through this journey.
I think, it's funny you say about that is that like, it does come back to the idea of the absurd being relatively likable, right? And in a way, almost like endearing. So like the more you put yourself out there, the more you talk about like all of this, at some point, someone's either going to be like, no, that's for me or not. And they're going to either question the morality of it or not, but they're also going to, decide whether or not it's endearing. And you, in a way, with Deli Boys, were you had the task of creating some endearment out of characters who are obviously not role models and who are obviously not scrupulous. And is there sort of a secret to finding, especially from the writer's vantage point, is there a secret to finding the likable moments among the chaotic ones?
Yeah, I think a lot of that centers around the ignorant striving for good with very little information. right? And I think that that is at the heart of these characters. Now, there's a version of the ignorant person who is malicious, right? And who is like fuck anything that's different or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But we like to think that in your soul as a human being, right? We all know very, very little, right? And we're guided by our conscience, by our heart, right? And I think that we've seen a lot of characters where their conscience is super questionable in a similar context in Walter White, right? Or whatever, or what have you. But, you know, and the thing that draws you into those dramas is the moral questioning. You know, that's why the anti-hero works there. I don't think the anti-hero can work in comedy the same way. I mean, it has, obviously. I think, you know, Danny McBride has built an entire career on that, you know, sort of like acerbic anti-hero. But it doesn't work for me because to me, meanness is not funny, right? It can be funny in the context of these two brothers, but only because you know that they love each other so much that they can egg on each other infinitely, right? And I think that that's something that speaks to the South Asianness of that relationship. We do have such deep bonds, right? That we can sort of come at each other in bigger ways, criticize each other, right? And yet, we do that with a freedom, knowing that at the end of the day, nothing can break that bond, right? And I think it's that flip side of it that allows these two brothers to, you know, to be problematic, right? In terms of the drugs, in terms of, you know, how they treat the people around them, you know, their egos, all that stuff. Because when it really comes down to it, we believe they'll do the right thing. And when they don't do the right thing, that's a major plot.
Yeah. I mean, that's the twist, right? And that's where, you know, you start, you know, gravitating towards even more. I mean, you yearn as an audience member to, you know, like, hey, I kind of want to find out what's next here. And, you know, in a way, I've read and heard you say this about the sort of South Asianness of it, or the cultural aspect of this, where you talk about Deli Boys intentionally not trying to either rectify or justify culture. And I love that whole idea. And was that sort of a mission statement or a temperature check that needed practice and even sort of needed reminding for other writers, the rest of the EP team, entire sort of, you know, anyone who's a stakeholder on the project to just sort of, you know, remind themselves of that? And then, by the way, is that a practice or a reminder that in a way, South Asian creators in Hollywood need to perhaps pay more attention to?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. You know, I feel like the idea of Muslim identity my whole life has been really monolithic, right? And I've been told that there is essentially only one approach to Islam, right? And that's being very, very devout and, you know, very disciplined in the physical practice of praying and fasting and doing all those things, right? But as I've grown older, right, and sort of gravitated away from religion at certain times and then come back to it at certain times, right, the things that have tied me back to it are things that I was told are haram. Psychedelic experiences, right? Like love, relationships, any of those things, right? Like, look, I'm married to a woman who I dated for years before that, right? Like, according to the books, you're not supposed to do that, but my love for her love for cats, which are, you know, a very venerated, you know, animal in Islam. She's the one who taught me all that. She's the one who got me back in touch with it. And it was DMT that literally allowed me to see the reflections of God, of Allah, you know what I mean? That made me Muslim again, that brought me back to it, right? And the thing that I've realized and wanted to take more ownership of in recent years is that being a Muslim, right? There's so many of us. We all have to have different approaches. And anyone who tells you this is not what Muslims do is stupid, because there's billions of us. We all have different approaches. The thing that binds us, right, is the morality of our Muslim, of our religion, right? But we all have different approaches, and we're not supposed to have intermediaries between ourselves and our higher power, right?
Right.
So in that, I think a lot of people would look at me, you know, would look at my lifestyle and the work that I do and say, this guy's not Muslim. But that person has no authority to say that, right?
Right.
And I think that a lot of Muslims in the world feel this way and feel like, oh, well, because I don't pray enough or don't fast enough or whatever, like I'm less of a Muslim. I don't think that's true at all. I think it lives in your heart, and I want the social definition, the global definition of being a Muslim to be more open, to accept this stuff. We're not defined by the most conservative interpretation of our religion. And in fact, I would love for that to radiate out to everything, right? Like, to be an American, you don't have to be, anti-immigrant, right? You don't have to hate other countries in order to love your country more, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can be many different things. I am many different things. And there is, I would argue, more of us that are many things than there are of us that are just one thing, right? But we've been led by the worst of us. We've been led by the worst mentality, right? And so I want to open that up. I want to retake ownership of that. Like, I am an American, a Muslim, I'm a creative, right? Everybody has the right to be exactly what they are and not be judged for it.
Well, and I love what you said there about this idea that there's no one way. There's definitely a lot of universality to the specificity. And I guess the question is that do South Asian American creatives need to do they need to do anything? I don't know. But is there maybe a more motivation now that should be out there to actually, absolutely diversify what stories are actually told? Because there isn't one version, right? And I've talked with many, many other guests on this show about sort of like mirrors and windows. And, the idea that like Deli Boys offers this great, specific, comedic mirror that centers around a family and a crime story. And it's an absurd sort of wild ride through this convenience store, epic, if you will, right? And that experience is very, very much relatable for many. But for South Asian American storytellers in Hollywood particularly, what do you hope the mirror is that they see, for themselves in a show like Deli Boys that then sort of translates to getting more of that out there? Either whether that could be the absurd, it could be the, kind of likable Don Draper type of character. It could be, anything, but, for there not to be this platform where you're pitching these stories to someone who says, well, I kind of got a weird Muslim story that we're doing, but, I don't want to take your story because it would take away from that. And, for us to get away from this idea that one pathway has to shove out the other. Sorry, that's a long-winded.
Oh no, I got an answer in the chamber for you though.
Yeah, tell me.
I think really what it comes down to is avoiding judgment. Yeah. I think that, we all have stories to tell that are unique, right? It's society that categorizes my story and Mo's story and Rami's story into one thing. Why? Because we're all Muslim. The shows are completely different, right? Broach completely different topics. The tones are so different, right? And they're all great shows, dare I say, right? But like, we all have different interpretations, yet we are defined by being Muslim. I had Deli Boys passed on because they were like, well, we're doing another Muslim show, so that slot is filled. And that Muslim show has nothing to do with anything when it comes to my thing. I just happen to have brown-skinned characters who are Muslim, right? So it's like, I really think the most important thing for us to do, right, as a community of brown-skinned people, all with roots in the same part of the world, is to stop judging each other in those ways. Now, we are making real headway in terms of getting people like us into the system, into the infrastructure, right? So Onyx Collective, I think, is a great example of that. Anil, our exec, who's my homie and is a brown guy. That's my executive, right? So it's like, we have those opportunities. We have those spaces. All we have to do is drop our stereotypes about each other. Pakistanis, Indians, Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Jains, whatever, right? Because all it says about us is that we're insecure. When you judge another person who looks just like you, and we broach this in Deli Boys with some levity because I feel so strongly about this that especially here in America, look, I'm an American. I've spent time in Pakistan, but I never lived in Pakistan. I can't speak to the balance of, social understanding there. But here in America, I can tell you that the people that I find community with are Pakistani and they're Indian and they're dark-skinned people from other places and they're white people and they're East Asians, right? But specifically within our group, right? We share so much in this world, in this country. It's ridiculous for us to have these divisions, and yet they exist. We judge each other so hard without taking a step back and realizing that this is a post-colonial mindset. We were forced into this, right? And so, when the great Chicky Lasagna, in episode 3, I think, he says, you guys hate each other even though you look exactly the same, right? I want that to hit. I want that to hit. Look at you and me in this frame right now, brother. We look like we're fucking related. Look at our faces. Yeah. We look very similar, right? And so it's like, I want us to get back to that understanding of each other, and the politics of America and representation, all those divisions they will be as firm as we allow them to be, right? Yeah. We're the ones laying those bricks. So yeah, like to me, the most important thing is to just let each other live, man. Yeah. Don't look at someone else and say, oh no, that's our culture. Actually, that's our culture. No, that dish is not Indian, it's Pakistani. Guess what? There was this thing called partition. We are all mixed around all over this continent, right? We do share the culture. We don't have to draw those lines. Yeah, I hope that this show, I think it's also idealistic and maybe optimistic to a stupid degree to think that I can make jokes and heal a wound that's, 80 years old or whatever, a century old. But you know what? I want to fucking try. Because if I have the platform and I can say something, this is what I want to say.
Let me ask you this, because I've heard you talk about explosive turns when it comes to plot and surprises and things like that. In having conversations like this, where look, yes, if you can get away in a political or an apolitical world without judging somebody, you've now made a catalyst for a new relationship, right? Yeah. In that way, sort of like, are the unexpected or the explosive turns, is that kind of a proxy for like how you live your life? Like, do you look and you're like specifically looking for those? So because there might be a nugget out there without judgment that if you were to just listen a little more carefully or just examine and analyze, that next explosive turn might be the one that sort of like offers a lot of richness for your journey.
That's a really fascinating question, dude. So yeah, I mean, absolutely, the hard turns are part of the vernacular of the show. Yeah. Just because I wanted to keep people reading the script, right? The pilot. And really, that's where it came from. I didn't look any deeper. But now that you mention it, honestly, it's kind of like occurring to me now. Yes, my life has been punctuated by very hard turns, right? The sudden, divorce of my parents that led to me moving to America, right? When I was 22, I was attacked by a mugger. It was, like almost killed. And that was a thing that really made me look at my life very differently, right? I think the thing that made me believe in myself as a writer, or allow myself to believe in myself as a writer, right? And, the strike, my move to LA, all of these big moments, right? That suddenly subverted any prediction I would have had about how my life was going to go. That's how things have gone. And I mean, like, I think that when you expect the unexpected in that way to a degree, right, without becoming paranoid, you start to look at life in a different way and you value it. You know what I mean? Like right now, I feel like what we're seeing in our political environment is people getting all caught up in this bullshit instead of just appreciating what we have, right? Which is a lot. You know what I'm saying? So I do think that it's allowed me to appreciate my life. You know what I'm saying? I'm thankful for all those experiences, even though some of them were so incredibly hard. And then, of course, that just sort of bled into my work. I think you just identified where that came from, right? And I didn't even realize it before that's where that stuff came from. I know these characters. I love these characters. They're gentle and naive and soft. And then a wrecking ball just comes through their life. Right. And changes them and forces them to reckon with, these bigger questions. That's literally what's happened to me in my life. And, I didn't even realize it. So good call.
Well, I mean, and you're right. Like you just sort of navigate through these things and it comes out in different ways in your expression. Um, it's funny. I gratefully talked to Tan France a couple
Oh,
of years
the
ago.
man. Oh my God. He is
Yeah,
the
just
best guy. Yeah.
enjoyed it so much, right? And there's something he said that really struck me when I asked him about how he builds and cultivates trust and what's the sort of secret sauce with that. And he said, essentially that it's pretty simple, right? You surround yourself with people you love that are committed to a mission that you believe in that sort of speaks to the truth. And did that particular? I mean, it sounds pretty obvious, but is that something that sort of rings true for a very personal project like Deli Boys, and for that matter, for the projects that are next as well, right? Is that a mission that's something that's sort of an ethos that rings true for you?
Yeah. And Tan is so heart forward. He's so love forward. And we know that someone who is as, mashallah, famous and successful as he is, like, really doesn't have to, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, he would be just as successful if he wasn't, but he has that at his heart. And I really do think that when he joined our cast, we were like, oh yeah, this guy is totally on vibe for us, right? And of course, like, that starts with myself and my fellow EPs, Nora Silver, Jenny Connor, and Michelle Nader, the showrunner. And we're all like sensitive artists. We have a loving relationship, right? And it radiates out. I think a thing we'd all agree on is that we would rather everybody take ownership and enjoy themselves and, really pour their hearts into it, not out of fear or desperation or because it's your job and you're expecting a paycheck or whatever, right? But just because you love the thing and the people who have brought you in to work on it give you the freedom to express yourself, right? So every single person, I mean, the production designer, Jesse Haddad, our costume designer, Kaylee Brenneman, all these different departments, right? Who totally took ownership. And we were like, oh, I see that you have a vision for the way that Lucky dresses or the way that Raj dresses or whatever, right? And really allowing that to happen. I really do think that if everyone's enjoying themselves, that the product will be good. I learned that on Bon Appetit, where we didn't have many resources. We were like a pretty scrappy setup, but just having a good time, being like, look, there's cannabis everywhere. Why would we, be angry and upset, right? And, trying to maintain that as much as possible because it is a grueling work environment, right? For anybody involved, it's a grueling work environment. So in my mind, like, adding to that stress is not going to make the product any better, right? And also then, as the creator of the show, right, there is this responsibility that falls on you to be like generous with your game that you've made, right? And really, I see it as like, I made a game board, I made these game pieces, and then me and my friends played on that board and filmed it, right? And that's what this show is essentially. And so, I do think that it came from the top. Michelle is a very loving leader and boss. You know what I mean? And it shows, like, I've seen her in action on the set of Shifting Gears. And she has that same, lightness and inclusiveness that we have on Deli Boys. So I feel very blessed that, we got her as a showrunner because she really maintains that vibe, right? It's like our army of writers and assistants or whatever. There's a bunch of them that were on Deli Boys that are also on Shifting Gears, and it's like all these familiar faces. And there's love. Like, I'm invested in the careers of our most junior writers, all the way up to our most venerable actors. You know what I'm saying? Like, totally. I'm invested in Porna's success as much as I'm invested in, our writing PA success. You know what I mean? I really do want it for all of them. And, it's hard to be a human. It's hard to be a vulnerable human, but if you can find that love, even when you're beaten down by the physical grind of it, I think you could come out with something beautiful. You know what I mean? And I gotta say also, the boys, man, Sagar and Asif, they create such a tone. Like, dude, when the camera's on you essentially all day, right? You have to be the one to set that tone. And they are they're so real. They're just like such mensches. You know what I mean? Like,
and that comes through, right, in the product. And And for the most part, right, it's great that I love how you kind of capture every single stakeholder. It doesn't matter if you're, the largest star or it's your first day on the project. You meet the love is there, the compassion is there, and the mission is there, right? Like, make no mistake, right? We're here. It's a grind. There's a lot of work to do, and yet we're all part of it. And if egos get in the way, if disagreements get in the way, that's going to happen. But at the end, like, let's check all that stuff at the doors because we can make something that we're proud of and that we love. Let me get you out of here on this one because you mentioned sort of this concept of how that chemistry works, right? So like the chemistry of the two main actors and Sagar and Asif and really sort of like how that flows through this in a way that kind of chemistry among people, both in front of the camera and, behind the camera helps things to stay evergreen. And I'm so curious about, this concept of longevity and staying evergreen, especially in a very, very tight business where attention spans are so short. And that's really tough to stay evergreen. So what do you think gives a project like Deli Boys, or for that matter, any of your future projects that you might work on, what do you think gives them longevity and even relevance, particularly related back to you personally?
So, I really think what it comes down to is simplicity in a lot of ways. So now whether you're talking about the way you're pitching a show, right? Now, if you say, okay, tell me what your show's about, and I say a whole paragraph of stuff, right? I'm going to lose you at some point. But if I can chop everything away, simplify, and get to one sentence, right? Or 3 words even, and it still expresses the heart of the show, right? Then you've got something. And I think that's a good litmus test, right? And, on the emotional level, when you look at these characters, right? It's very simple. The relationship is very simple. Lucky made a promise to Baba, I'll take care of your boys. That's driving the entire show, essentially, right?
Right.
So, and the boys have an unspoken bond. One of them can say, I love you. The other one can't, but they love each other. And it's as simple as that, right? Mir is the head, Raj is the heart, right? Like there's all these very simple rules, just very human rules underneath it all, right? And whether we're talking about, a large arc or a single episode arc or a single scene, a single joke sometimes, right? If you can get down to those brass tacks and make a commentary on a simple thing, like I said before, like Pakistanis and Indians don't understand each other, right? And you see it from this outside perspective, and then you sort of draw it out and you're like, okay, here's these 2 families, right? It's like a Pakistani family and an Indian family. They literally cast the racists out of the room. They say, get out of here so we can talk. And then we end up setting up a marriage rishta between a Muslim and a Hindu, right? So it is like, to me, simplicity is at the heart of all of this. I think if you can boil things down to that simplicity, then I think you've got something. That's what I do bring to my other projects, right? Like the things I've learned from Deli Boys are, address that directly. So in every project I do, and I felt this for a long time, if you can boil it down to 3 words and make someone go like, oh, that's interesting. Now you've got something, right? So I really think that, when you're looking at a story, I'm a big sci-fi fan, and I feel like the best sci-fi has so many bells and whistles, but when you get down to the heart of it, there's one simple concept that we're exploring, right? So yeah, that's my vibe. I hope I can keep that going.
Well, simplicity and keeping human rules in mind, I know is attracting more and more people to you and all your work. Abdullah, what a great treat this has been. Really appreciated you joining us and hope we can visit with you again down the road.
Thanks so much, man. Anytime, I'm here.
You're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. Stay tuned.